information. So, you know, the main thing of wanting to have this session, and again, we've been having several of these sessions. We got kind of a 4-part series. We started out with kind of the 2D OST kind of takeoff platform, dove into Sage Timberline estimating, kind of background about its application, and just kind of keep building. And then we moved into today's the BIM modeling, and then we're going to talk next week about the enterprise estimating kind of in the kind of future and beyond there with that product line. So today, again, you know, one of the main reasons we wanted to have this is that really in kind of several fold is one, there's a lot of information out there today about BIM. A lot of folks have come up to me over the last few years and have asked me about what is BIM. So it's kind of how we're going to focus today's presentation is kind of what is BIM. And then a lot of the folks that use our Sage Timberline estimating application, there's a lot of those folks out there that don't realize that we connect up with a lot of this technology, and that's kind of the second part of this. And then also along the way, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about kind of the Sage Timberline estimating and how we do connect, and then along the way, give you some other links and some other websites and products that are definitely actively tied in with the BIM technology. So that's kind of the purpose of today. We're gonna take a short hour going through that. Typically in these webinars we have about 15 minutes of question and answer. Since there's so many folks that have come on the line with this webinar, what we're going to do is we're going to reach out to you and give you one of our email addresses that you can send in questions or call us, and then we will get back to you. Regardless, we will be calling you, but if you don't want to wait for us, you can certainly, that's another route, and we'll do that at the end of the presentation. So again, my name is Paul Azikar with Alliance Solutions. I handle the estimating products for the company. Before I kind of dive into this BIM information, here's some of the products that we typically carry or currently offer. We have about 4,000 customers across the United States, from the West Coast to the East Coast. And some of the products, if you notice up there, we supply or offer Sage 300 Construction, formerly known as Timberline Accounting, Sage 100, formerly known as Master Builder. Sage Estimating is Timberline Estimating. Got a few other applications here. Off of the estimating application, we have some feeder applications such as on-screen takeoff from OnCenter, PlanSwift, Innovia, and dProfiler, which are a couple of BIM technologies that Sage Timberline Estimating connects up with. If you notice there's some locations there, and there's the customers we currently have. You know, again, the whole focus of today is what I really want to start with is instead of just diving into of how we work with BIM. And you know, I was fortunate enough over the past few years to be able to, you know, I've spent 21 years of working with Timberline Estimating and the supporting products, from selling it to being a former user to doing consulting work. And I've been able to get on a couple of projects where we're utilizing that BIM technology. But instead of just diving right into that, I wanted to first of all kind of step all the way back and say, you know, what is BIM, and kind of try to give you some basics, because I have a real mixed bag in the audience here today. And so, you know, for those that are experts in BIM, forgive me for a moment, but I want to bring everybody kind of up to an even playing field here. We found this slide. It's a great slide because if you look here in the middle, it talks about, you know, the building information modeling, BIM. And if you take the concept of the, you know, most folks heard of Autodesk, and Autodesk has a product called AutoCAD, which works in a kind of a 2D fashion. And then there's also another application that they have developed a number of years ago called Revit. And Revit is the 3D way of developing your design. And if you look at this diagram here, and if you just use, you know, kind of Revit, there's other platforms out there, but you know, if you use the Autodesk Revit platform, and if you were to look at instead of putting a 2D, you know, what a door might look like or a wall, if you're doing it in 3D, the nice thing about BIM and what it does is that if you you put in a door, for example, in a 3D world, there's all kinds of information that you can program into that door, wall, roof structure, whatever you're doing. And so the advantage that Revit gives really the whole construction industry and also architectural and design is that as that information goes in to the design inside of the Revit application, that's all that information allows us to be able to kind of glom onto or connect in other ways that we can leverage from. So if you look at this diagram here, you know, here's the concept of BIM right in the middle, and imagine that being kind of the mothership of, you know, Revit there. And as that stuff is programmed in, you know, information as an example, website information, manufacturer part number, its energy information, you know, all kinds of things can be programmed in that. And so what that allows other applications to feed off of is, for example, if you look here, there's all kinds of different applications that help us once that's put in place in the design side. You'll notice, you know, construction, I'll give you a couple examples. There's applications such as Navisworks. And Navisworks is a tool that allows you to do a lot of conflict resolution, so, you know, saving a lot on the RFI process. So as that goes into Revit, and as you put in that information, Navisworks allows you to take, let's say, the mechanical, plumbing, electrical, maybe your drywall, and see where you may have some conflicts and interferences there that you can delve into and flush out before it even hits the, you know, out in the field. So, you know, there's an example of construction logistics. You know, there's another tool out there, there's energy analysis applications that find out how efficient that building is off of that information. There's the conceptual design. There's the ability to do operation and maintenance. There's applications out there today that actually be able to tie to a Primavera schedule off of those objects. There's, you know, one of the applications, and I know there's other ones out there that I have customers using, called Synchro. And Synchro connects the P6 schedule to your model objects out of Revit, and you can visually and not only see your design being built in front of you, but you can also cash flow visually. So there's a lot of things that kind of feed off of that. The other component, of course, is we can pull quantities off of that information, and not only just get quantities, be able to drive costs. So, you know, that kind of delves right into kind of eventually my kind of second part of this presentation is how does Sage Timberline Estimating leverage from this? Well, it's leveraging it from the quantity and driving a cost estimate. So, anyway, it's a great slide, and one of the things that we have at the end of this slideshow here, and again, I'm not trying to make the bulk of this on a PowerPoint, just want to give you some basics, but is we have a bunch of links that can take you to other websites, the products that we don't even support, but I just want to kind of educate you on what's out there and what's available that some of my customers are currently using. If you notice here's a couple slides, the energy analysis off of the model that can be performed. You'll notice here that there's if I come back here, there's clash detection tools. I referenced Navisworks. If I come in here, this is that application called Synchro. Synchro, again, connects your model objects to the P6 schedule. So now you can visually see your building being built. And if your schedule applies costs and resource information to it, you can also visually cash flow and see where you should be at. You know, so it's a very valuable tool. Now, kind of moving into off of the basics of what is BIM, and then we kind of move into that second part is, you know, how does Sage Timberline Estimating work with the BIM technology? And again, part of this presentation is education on BIM, but a lot of our customers that are currently out there, maybe on the call today, of you know, you spend all this time and effort of building this cost database. It's nice to know that it can keep on living, you know, and Sage being on the forefront of a lot of this stuff. And so, you know, just some basics here on how we leverage from it. And I'm gonna, before I get into the BIM, couple of BIM technologies that we work with, I'm gonna spend a few minutes just so you understand kind of the basic core estimating, so that you see how we're working in that BIM world. So, but if you look here, there's pre-construction, construction, and in operations. And if I come here, and you'll notice there's schematic, design development, construction documents. Currently today, Sage has 3 rows of BIM, and eventually going to be a 4th row of BIM. And 3 of the 4 really work off of that Revit model. And I go back to, programming that stuff in 3D and feeding off the details of what's in that Revit model. We have another application. That application is called the Profiler, and it's more of a conceptual tool, how big, how tall, how many stories, and I'm working with that in a visual, virtual kind of world, and it's connecting and drives an estimate. So, if you look at the schematic design and construction logistics, this whole thing here, the concept, if you look from schematic to construction documents, it's built on the premise of really working with the details of the database, the doors, the walls, the slab footings, and almost like you would with a set of blueprints, and have some details to work with. As I come down through here, the Revit modeling projects I've been on, I've been able to work from the kind of the schematic all the way through those construction documents as that model evolves or gets more detailed. If you look here, the last piece here, if you notice the conceptual phase, this conceptual phase, and I'm spending a little bit of time here because it's important to know Timberline estimating by itself really kind of mirrors this whole kind of format. We have items and assemblies inside our database that are really predicated to connect with more of that detailed Revit world. The conceptual part of it is we have an application called cost model or model estimating that allows you to answer that information, kind of how big, how tall, many stories. It's a non-visual, but the concept is the same, where we don't have details in front of us. And so this whole piece here is that D-profiler that allows us to work in kind of that conceptual world. Applications over here that we are currently working with that are more pulling the Revit are applications such as Innovia, Autodesk QTO. There's another application out there that's working on an interface called Assemble Technologies. And again, they're all built on kind of working with the Revit details. Here's a couple screens. This is a picture of what the D-profiler is going to look like. Being able to not have a set of drawings in front of us, but be able to put in some kind of basics of the product or project and have it drive a cost estimate, a monthly utility cost, being able to drop in Google Earth and kind of work with a plot of property and put that building on there and work at a kind of a high level. Here's an example of what you're going to see with kind of the Innovia, where we're working with the Revit models, as you notice here, and connecting it to our Timberline database and driving a cost estimate. Over the last few years of working with this, I mean, it's really becomes, some of the big benefits is not only can you generate estimates quickly, but it really becomes forging that relationship with that architect and getting on the same page and communicating back and forth and really being able to, buy into, if you're truly working as a team, we can pull that information. I've got customers that used to take several weeks to put budgets together, now take 3 days, because they're really working together and they get those consistent models and they can pump out that information real quickly. So, I think the important thing too is that, a lot of people think that, this modeling concept, that the whole BIM is kind of the replacement to everything that you're doing out there. No, it's just another tool. It's like using, a 2D tool like on-screen takeoff. It's another way of check validating your estimate. And where's the model as it relates to numbers coming in from sub-bids and in my own internal numbers that I'm checking. So, it really is and again, your estimate's going to be as good as how that model is, much like a set of blueprints. So blueprints will never be the final number, but it's certainly a good start, and you got to infiltrate the other things that are eventually going to be. I mentioned before that we currently have here's the 3 roads. The other one that I haven't listed there is Assemble. They're currently working on an interface. Again, QTO, Innovi, and Assemble are really kind of formatted on the whole concept of working with that Revit model and the details that are kind of forging and coming out of that application. The D-Profiler is more of a conceptual tool like our cost modeling. Then again, I have no problem. I mean, we can send you these links here, some popular links that are kind of tied in with my presentation that, again, some of them we're hot and heavy in, other ones that are just links out there that give you better information and understand some of these tools that you may not be aware of. Here is my information. Again, Tim, the other fellow that's helping with these presentations, will give you an email that you can send in your questions and call us if you don't want to wait for us. Again, we're going to follow up with everybody, but it might be a few days with so many people that are on the call here. So enough with the PowerPoint, and I'm going to minimize the screen here, and I'm going to go into estimating. Now, just before I get into BIM, like I mentioned, I want you to kind of understand the basics of core estimating before I start venturing out. And I think one of the things that I really like where Sage is going with the concept is that, it's a database spreadsheet concept, and it's been that way for years. And if you look here, here's an estimate spreadsheet, nothing more than a blank manila folder. And then at this point, I can open up, and here's my database. Well, my database can be whatever you want it to be. It doesn't have to be the latest CSI. It can be an older version of CSI. This is nothing more than a book. It's alphanumeric. I can come into openings here, go into wood doors, and again, whether I have 3 items or 3,000 items, there's no limit. This is truly, think of it this way. I have a customer of mine that has over 1 million lines in their database. And it took 2.5 years to build, but you're really taking everything out of your head and putting it into a centralized place that others can use, kind of like when I was a Progeneer back in the day, where you're leveraging from all that good information from your senior PMs, owners of a company, and this is what you're seeing here, and again, it can be whatever you want. The whole concept of this is that I may have an item that I want to just drag in, and if you notice here, if I say that I've got 2 of these, you'll see there's a unit price and there's an amount. I can come over here and change this number or make this $1,500 and it back calculates. But I've got a database spreadsheet concept that has, not as I enter a quantity, it populates all the cost part of it. And a couple other things I talk about, the database and spreadsheet concept. We have different ways, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, we have different ways to drive the database into our spreadsheet. We have items, assemblies, and models. And so the item would be like a door itself. Assembly might be everything that makes up a wall. And a model might be, hey, how big, how many stories. So I go back to those first couple slides in PowerPoint. We really mirror, our estimating application mirrors how we work in the BIM world. If you look at the items and assemblies, we're kind of in that detailed mode. We're working with the set of blueprints. And so if I was to come in here and say I want to go into an exterior wall and answer questions, you'll notice there's pieces and parts. And again, this can be whatever you want it to be. It could be more conceptual, more detailed. We can attach pictures at this level and show people what that's going to look like. And as we fill out the interview here, and answer this information, and again, the questions can be whatever you want it to be. It really is trying to gear on how your company thinks. And as I fill that stuff in, you'll notice that it drives all the goodies that are needed. Well, if you look here, these lists of assemblies, the list of items, are really kind of, I go back to that whole schematic design development, construction document concept of working with the Revit details, all that information that goes into that Revit model. So as we look at this application with those 3 apps that we work with in BIM, the QTO, the Innovi, and soon to be Assemble, what we're trying to do, and this is one of the things I really like where Sage is going, is really trying to say, outside the walls of our estimating application, how can we train that database to work in lots of different ways so that we can pull in and drive that spreadsheet, which again is why I'm giving you a little basics here first. The concept of, back to the fourth row, D-profiler, is, hey, we don't have a set of detailed drawings in front of us. We don't have that information. But what we want to do is be able to kind of answer things such as, if I go to modeling and I was to come in here to a retail shell, you'll notice here as I fill out, now there's an interview, and I can attach pictures and answer an interview of how big is it, how tall, perimeter, and all that. Well, again, trying to give you the analogy of how our application estimating works with BIM, this is very similar to how D-profiler works when you don't have a set of drawings and you want to enter some of the basics of that. And then at that point, what we're doing is we're connecting those conceptual, I guess you could say conceptual objects as they're going into design, and connecting it with the Timberline database to drive a cost estimate. So those are just, again, purpose today was not to focus a whole bunch of time on the estimating, but just to kind of give you the basics. Now, if I close out of this, and I jump in first of all with the whole concept of dealing with the Revit model. Now we're into an application like what we're calling it. This is in Ovia, and again, what we're doing with this is as we pull in the details of that Revit model, all the objects, now we can work and train our Timberline database to work with this model. So instead of us manually doing what I just did a minute ago, it drives that spreadsheet. So in this application here, I would say you really look at two main things that it's doing for us as an estimator, PM, BIM coordinator, is when I'm working in this 3D world, this app does two main things: communication and being able to connect that database to drive a cost estimate off the quantities. The beautiful, and in my opinion, in the years of working with this, the communication back to the architect, seeing what's changed, is every bit as important as it is driving the cost estimate. So, for example, if you were to, just to give you some basics of this, if you were to draw a line across the middle of the screen here, this really is all the visual part of this. So, for example, if I wanted to say, I really want to come over here and, maybe I want to walk closer to the model, maybe I want to, kind of spin this and look at this. I can look at this in a 3D view. I can bring this back up to the way I want it here. I can, and if you, just a little basics about the whole Revit world. Revit works in what they call elements or components. And if you look over here, here is a library of the component types. And it kind of mirrors, if you look here, it kind of mirrors how a set of blueprints work. Here's the architectural. If I come down here, here's structural. I get into the HVAC, mechanical, electrical. And this is a library almost like CSI, but to the architects and engineers, these are the component types in Revit that they could be working with. So if you notice here, here's the library of those. You'll see 35 and 86. Well, these are the components on this particular building, this school building, admin building, that they're working with on this project. So the whole concept, when you see everything bolded, these are major components that this model is currently being comprised of. I want to come in here and I talk about visually. I want to come in here and I say, gee, I want to turn off the exterior windows. Those exterior windows can go off. I can, at any time, whatever I turn on or off, I can go over here to communication and take a snapshot and throw it into Excel or Word to understand. The other thing that's really nice is as I turn things off, I can dive in. The other thing that it does in a great way is that back in the Revit, when we're working with that model, you can actually reference a previous set of drawings and do what they call show design change status. And what that does now is it visually shows you what's changed. And the way I have, and again, I go back to, we would take pictures, send it out and say, this is what's going on, why did we do this? And if you look here, if I was to examine, the way I've got the color coding is blue's been deleted, red's been added, yellow something's changed. If I come in here, you'll notice that they've added that the building designator A, they've changed something within the wall types. They deleted some of this exterior sunscreen protection. So again, we can get kind of an idea from week to week or different budget iterations of how that model is evolving, what they're changing, and flesh that out and go back and communicate with them. You know, another really nice thing. So when you're looking at that first part of the screen, it's really kind of the communication side of things. And the other thing that we do is if you look over here on the lower left, these are the components that you're seeing here that represent what's inside that model. So if you notice here, this isn't the full library, this is over here, but the ones that are currently being used fall over here in this lower left. Well, what you're doing is a component is like a major, again, I'm trying to equate it back to construction into your CSI codes. It's almost like concrete, masonry, you know, steel, kind of a major CSI category. And underneath that, these are our Revit objects that make up this particular building. So these are the details that are coming out of that Revit model for that particular component. Again, I'm still on the whole mode of communicating right now, but if I click on a component here, interior walls, you'll notice all my walls are now highlighted in red. I can come in here and you'll notice as I go through, there's an example of, you know, that wall there. You know, if I want, a lot of times I would work in a fashion where I'd say, you know, let's uncheck everything and just work in interior walls so I can physically see what's going on with that. You'll notice whatever I have highlighted here, I also have a picture of this, and I can say, you know, communication, take a snapshot, send it into Word. You know, if I was to highlight this here, then it highlights all the walls for me there. So the other thing that we did a lot of is as you open this up and you see all these different walls that are part of this category, is that a lot of times we'd say, let's get, is there any way of getting a kind of a color-coded of all my different wall types and kind of a legend? So, and again, I'm still focusing on communication, but if I open this up here and I highlight that, I can do what they call this apply color. And if I come in here, you'll notice as I highlight things, it's building over on the right the things that I'm highlighting, but it's also giving me a color-coded way of seeing what's physically every wall type, every type of object, quantities, and a legend. And again, we would use this a lot, dump it out into Excel, take a look at the model, and for that particular component, that being interior walls, and kind of understand that. So, you know, again, the communication is really huge as it relates to trying to tie. I go back to one of the first things I said, that, you know, it all kind of funnels from that whole, you know, when that Revit object is dropped in a 3D world, how we're now leveraging from that, and not just from a cost, but also from a communication standpoint. I go back to what I was showing a minute ago back in core estimating, where I showed the items and assemblies and the models and that database spreadsheet concept. What we're doing here now is we're saying, well, let's have that live in the world of kind of BIM technology. So if you look here, Timberline and Takeoff, you see new or open. It's the same thing I could be doing over in the core estimating. And if I go to Takeoff, there's assembly Takeoff, the same thing I was showing a minute ago, and I open that up. What you see now is a list of the assemblies that could be available. And you see if I draw a line right here in the middle, these are where the two worlds come together. When I say two worlds, it's when the BIM world comes together with the database. And all we're doing is training that. So if I open this up and drag this object, you'll notice this automatically comes up because I've already trained it on a previous project. But the concept here is that's that questionnaire that I was showing inside of the core Sage estimating application. Now what we're doing is we're taking that questionnaire and making it available in the BIM world and connecting it with the different attributes that are inside that BIM object. And the nice thing about this is that if you're working with an architect, that you're going to continue working with that architect. If you have an in-house design build group, you know, if they're designing that school, that hospital, or whatever they're doing in a consistent way, that we can glean this information and connect with our database, it's burned in. So if we see it on another project, that object, or it might be another budget iteration, it knows it. So if you look here, here's the attributes, and all I'm doing, just so you know, is I'm just taking this and I drop it in, and once I've done that, it's burned into the database. And if I click on this little box here and say takeoff, you'll notice here that now there is my Timberline estimate spreadsheet that's inside of BIM. And if I click over here and I click on the different ways, maybe you want to see it more in a unit format structure. Maybe you want to look at it by a CSI division, phase, you know, all kinds of different ways. And that's all coming from the core Timberline or Sage Timberline estimating application. The beauty of this is that as I work with the, you know, my analogy I give people, it's kind of like a roller coaster ride. Is that initially, when I come down here and I do a takeoff, and I connect this object with the database, and I click on this and I say take off, I'm training that object to work with my database. I can also go take off all, and it goes and grabs all of those particular wall types, and now I have an estimate for every one of those. That if you see a little dollar sign, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a little dollar sign telling me that there's an estimate connected to that. If I click on this, you'll notice nothing's connected yet. The reason I'm spending a little time here is, and I use that roller coaster analogy, is that as I've gone through this and I've connected it to the database, now it's burned into the Timberline database. So as I have that connected, all I do on a budget iteration or a project that's similar, same architect, I run auto takeoff, and now I say just go. And you'll notice it's going to go through the entire project or the model, and it's just assigning all my data, the database information, cost side, to that entire model. And now I can throw it into the estimate and change the numbers and add any other stuff that maybe the model doesn't have present. But if you notice here, I talk about kind of all roads leading to that Sage estimating spreadsheet. And if I say open estimate in Timberline, and I talk about communication too, the one thing I didn't show, but I showed show design change status. You can also say show what's been taken off in the estimate visually back in the BIM. But if you notice here, here's my estimate that it drove. I didn't have to go through and find the items in the database or open up the assemblies. You know, the nice thing about this too is, and again, for folks that know the Timberline estimating side of things, great. We have a product. We have a feature called WBS codes. Those codes are ways of tagging the building. So it might be building A, B, C. It might be floor 1, 2, 3, or room A, B, and whatever. The concept with that is that as you're doing your estimate, and I use a drywall wall type as a great example, I have the ability to tag that inside of BIM, and if I said there's a wall type and I take it off once, and I can take all that wall type off, and I can get total quantities for that, but I also, using the WBS breakdown codes, kind of like I'm showing here, the different ways I can sort this. Like in this example, it is exactly how I've taken it off inside of BIM, you know, and I can roll this up, but this could have easily been, you know, floor 1, 2, 3 all the way to floor 10, but I've taken off the wall type once instead of having to do a takeoff on every floor for that. It just went and grabbed it. So that's kind of the concepts of how we work with the Revit world, and QTO is kind of the same concept. Again, working with those details, and also really I would say the major difference is it's working with more of DWF properties, where this is working truly with the Revit properties, and there's literally could be hundreds of information, attributes, or properties that could be, and we get a chance to work with that. So, you know, that's one side of things. You know, as I close out of this, I'll keep that open. The other component is I use the different ways to drive the spreadsheet, you know, from the database. We have items, assemblies, and models. And the items and assemblies, again, are more of that working with the details. And Whereas the cost modeling is, we don't have drawings in front of us. We want to be able to answer how tall, how big, how many stories concept. And so we work with an application, that being dProfiler, I mentioned that earlier, that allows us to connect the Timberline database at a very conceptual level. And then as I work with that conceptual visual model, it's driving a cost estimate. So I showed you some questions in that cost model example, but it's really kind of correlates very closely to how we do it here. So if you look here, and I say open new, the nice thing about this is this really kind of dovetails a couple avenues of BIM, not only driving the visual aspects of it, and also quantity and cost, but also energy analysis. So if I click here on open new, there's some basics I can fill in about the project. You know, if I utilize a zip code, it'll tie another avenue of running an energy analysis with it. You'll notice here on the drop down, this is kind of the same concept of going to the Timberline cost model and picking out a multi-use questionnaire or a small box retail or a parking structure. And as I do that, I hit next, and here's some questions. You know, how many floors? What's the parapet height? You know, floor to floor height. What is the shape of this? Right now it's just a rectangle, but I can come in here and say, let's make it an L shape. And as I fill out some of this stuff and hit next, you know, what's the spandrel height? This is very similar to kind of how we're working with that cost model. And so now what we're doing is we're connecting, drew a box here. You know, as you see here, here's the box. I can also run in here and say, well, you know, based on that box today, I like to run an energy analysis, and it goes off and does its thing, and based on the efficiency of that building, it'll pump out and give us an average monthly utility cost here. If I come back to the visual side of it, again, what's really nice about this, in lieu of just our cost modeling, is not only are we connecting the Timberline data to this kind of stuff, but it's visually you're able to work with it. So I can come in here and say, you know, I really want to go to terrain, and you know, maybe I want to go to topography, open up Google Earth. You know, maybe I want to type in an address. And it's going to find that address, find the plot of property. And I'm going to use that as my basis for where that's going to go. So if I want to come in here, say import, it'll import that, drop it in, so I can kind of dress this thing up a little bit. But the things that I'm doing with that building, and I'm going to close out of this for a second. I'll move the building back where I want it. But now I'm using, you know, that Google Earth topography. You know, I've got a building here. At this point, when I talk about it being connected to the Timberline databases, I can click on Estimate View, and there's my estimate at this moment in time. And don't hold me to the actual value here, but I just want you to get the concept. But if you look here, currently today, this is what it's generating out of the Timberline database. If I come back to the spatial view, you know, you might want to go in here and say, well, I'd sure like to put in a site, and I can use a site boundary, and maybe that site boundary is going to be out here. I put the site in there. You know, maybe I want to come in here and throw in a parking area. That parking area is going to go from here. They have a nice feature where I can do an auto parking, where I can pick an endpoint. It automatically puts in all the different stalls for me. Maybe I want to put in a landscape. Maybe that landscape's going to go from here. and I'm just kind of drawing this up. But the beauty is these pieces, as I work with this, as I dress up my model, instantly gives me a new estimate here. If I come back to the spatial view, the other thing I can do with the building is, do a lot of what-if analysis. Or maybe I want to come in here and say, I really want to move this up. Maybe I want to pull this out a little more. And if I go to the estimate, there's a new number. So, again, not trying to do a training today, but really to give you some concepts to kind of sink in and understand, I don't know, of all the last few years, probably last 3-4 years, I don't know how many people I've come in working that already have our estimating application, or people that are looking at an estimating application are unaware of how active Sage is on really the forefront of this BIM technology. And my big thing is I go back to the 21 years of working with this, and it's sure nice to have on a consulting basis a conversation with a customer that says, hey, I've spent all this time and effort of putting my costs and building these assemblies and all this information, and I want it to continue to live, and it's nice to be able to have that conversation and find out really what road of BIM do they want to move into. And I think that's the, as I kind of finish up with talking about concepts today here on BIM, that's the next session we have next Thursday is really our Sage's enterprise estimating application and kind of the future of where that application is going. And I go back to that PowerPoint slide, and we talk about, if I go into others here, if you notice, they're moving their whole application into this ability to open up their technology so that others could glom onto this. And our position is, hey, there's great tools out there that are entering the BIM market, and if they want to try to work with us, it's communicating with Sage and building a couple bridges like you're seeing here today. So we could be here next year talking about, maybe there's a dozen roads of BIM technology, that maybe there's a great mechanical one out there, or electrical, or whatever. So it's really not our place to say this is the only marriage we'll ever have, just because the way that BIM world is changing. So, again, typically there's questions and answers with this.